Welcome to the Workshop Therapy Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew, and joining me today is my on-again, off-again co-host, my wife. Take one was much better than that.
Oh, you want me to do the same thing again?
Well, no.
I have to remember it.
It was more entertaining.
Sorry. We haven't been on again, off long. No, hang on. We haven't been on again, off again for a very long time.
That's not what you said. You said, I'm glad that...
Oh, that's what you said.
No. Yeah, that was what I said.
Yeah.
You said, glad I'm not your on-again, off-again, anything else. I mentioned a pre-show because we recorded a pre-show before.
Right.
Which doesn't happen very often with you, or ever.
Or has ever happened. And we now know why, so when you're bored, you understand why.
Yes. Anyway, so I thought today we'd answer a couple questions of the depression episode that I recorded without you a few episodes ago. And, just kind of delve a little bit deeper into that because it provoked a few questions. And I think
sometimes I provoke you. Sorry.
Speaking of throwing me off the rails. Anyway, and so I thought maybe what I'd do is I wrote out kind of some information regarding the questions themselves, and then maybe we could talk about it.
Possibility exists.
Sound like a plan?
Sure.
Bring up the right document here. So we actually kind of covered this a little bit when we talked about getting a diagnosis for ADHD and autism and that type of stuff. But there was a similar question came in about depression, like what do you get from a diagnosis of depression? Or like what's the point of getting a diagnosis of depression?
Okay. What does the research say, Dr. Hatch?
I'm actually not Dr. Hatch in this aspect.
It's true. You are still a Dr. Hatch.
It's true. So what I wrote down is getting a depression diagnosis can actually bring several benefits. And the main benefit is by opening the doors to effective treatment and support. It helps people better understand their mental health and encourages them to engage in appropriate therapies. For starters, a formal diagnosis often unlocks access to treatment options that otherwise might not be available. And research shows that many people with depression don't get the care they need because it remains undiagnosed. And even people who are diagnosed, up to 23% or more, don't have a follow-up appointment with a specialist within 6 months.
To do, right?
Well, and it's also a lack of resources for many people too.
Do you think there's also a lack of understanding of how to go about accessing those resources as well?
Probably. There's that aspect of it as well, but that's kind of the point of the getting the diagnosis, because once you get that diagnosis, people are more likely to be referred on to the appropriate community resources if they are available. But that doesn't mean they will be. It just increases the odds of that happening.
Yeah.
The other thing that's kind of important about a diagnosis is that it can help people make sense of what they're going through.
Feel less alone.
Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly what I wrote next is, without a diagnosis, it's easy to feel isolated or confused about their symptoms. May even see them as personal failures rather than some cause behind it. So recognizing depression as a known treatable condition can offer a sense of relief, maybe reduce some of the stigma, and make it easier for people to reach out to family and friends for support, which is an essential part of recovery, especially for depression.
Yeah.
Having that community support around you. And finally, probably the most important thing, a diagnosis can motivate people to start therapy or other treatments. So kind of the point of a diagnosis then is not to give you a crutch, although lots of people use it as a crutch or an excuse. But if you want to get better, the diagnosis gives you the path forward.
Right.
So the example I thought of was like the truck a couple weeks ago was making funny noises, and you could hear where the noise was coming from apparently better than I could.
Wait, you didn't believe me.
Well, I just didn't. I heard the noise coming from the front, and you heard the noise coming from the back. And so,
I mean, I will give you that as a general rule. You're usually better at that sort of thing than I am.
But not in this case. But anyway, so I knew my brakes were in relatively good shape prior to this moment, because I did check them in the summer and they were decent. So I didn't suspect that it was a brake problem. And so then we went down this paranoia realm of what ifs. I went down, and finally decided to start pulling apart the front end of the truck and discovered that brake pads were worn, so we replaced the brake pads in the front, but the noise was still there, so that made me panic. But then it was more clearly audible from the back for me, and so then pulled off the back and replaced the back brakes, and suddenly the noise went away. So the example here is you can kind of live in this paranoia of what ifs. But once you go down that road of diagnosis and you go, oh, yes, this is the problem, it gives you a clear path forward and a direction to the appropriate fixes. Any thoughts?
I agree.
And too often, one of the problems with like getting a diagnosis, though, is people don't use it as a roadmap. They use it as a crutch or as an excuse, not as a crutch, because a crutch, again, can be beneficial.
I think that has like societal implications as well as not always getting the best therapist or the best fit therapist for dealing with the problem as well. Okay, so what you said again?
Well, some people use it as an excuse rather than a roadmap.
Yeah, but I think some of that is because that's how it's been portrayed in the media. That's how it was portrayed to our generation. It's a crutch. You shouldn't need to have a piece of paper. You can do it. You can push through. Clearly that's working out for everybody. And I think to some degree, some therapists or well-meaning family members or whatever will validate your feelings to a point that
it creates a disability.
It creates a disability. It makes it worse.
Yeah, support you in your problem rather than help you.
Yeah, I mean,
grow from your problem.
You watched that the Temple Grandin movie with me a couple weeks ago, and I think one of the themes that stuck out in that to me, and I've read a couple of her books now, and we heard her speak a long time ago, and anyway, that's something that's always stuck out to me is how much she advocates for people in people's lives who have challenges and things like that, is to teach manners, to teach respect, to teach things that give people dignity. And I think often with depression, for me, I see there's a lack of dignity, of self-respect.
Well, depression is
right, because it's debilitating, and it's you feel absolutely horrible and awful and useless.
Well, and that's the problem with depression, right? Is the feeling of worthlessness. So how can you have self-respect when you're worthless?
Yeah, and I think part of it's so difficult in the society we live in right now, because so many things are done by machines, or somebody does them better, and there isn't a sense of like community, of belonging, of where you fit, of how you can help others. And it's easy to get so wrapped up in yourself.
Yeah, and when a significant portion of your interaction with the world is through a device.
Yeah.
And we tend to show our good sides and not our bad sides on the social media. So you look around and everybody knows that, but at the same time you're bombarded with this sensation of, oh, look at so-and-so's doing great, or look at so-and-so who's wearing a ball gown while they're making dinner for their family in their beautiful house. You know, and so you
and to that end too, like the pendulum swings, right? Like, oh, now let's glorify messy, terrible houses. And I mean, our house is, yeah, I'm working full time. We have 3 kids. It's not disgusting, like there's not, but it's messy, right? Like
it's not terrible either.
But it's not terrible either. And I think that it's important to realize if things are piling up to a point, if you're not able to get through things, that is also a depressive sign, right?
Yeah.
And there is a level of this isn't okay too.
Yeah. Anything else profound to add?
No, that's it. My brain is shutting down slowly.
Okay, the next question that was asked was, how often are medication used to treat depression versus other options like psychotherapy?
That's a good question. I don't think that.
So, the recommendation, first line of defense would be psychotherapy, counseling of some sort, talking to somebody and working through. There's a whole bunch. There's hundreds of potential psychotherapies. So just because you go to one counselor and they didn't really work for you, it might just be the fact that they were approaching it from a
You didn't connect with that person.
Yeah, you didn't connect with that person. They didn't use a technique that worked for you.
Yeah.
You know, there's lots of online options, and there's even like apps.
Mm-hmm.
Just ones that's actually on my phone that I use occasionally. It's called Liven, and it's a free app, and it's just helps you kind of track your moods, and it helps you be kind of mindful of what's triggering downward spirals and that type of stuff.
Interesting. I didn't know you did that.
Yeah.
I'm proud of you.
That's because I battle depression in secret. Remember, this is social media, and we're supposed to be projecting an air of perfection and excellence.
Oh, yeah.
We're not supposed to have struggles.
Uh-huh.
Everything is going great.
Swimmingly.
Anyway, so what I wrote down in answer to this question is treating depression usually involves medication, therapy, or both. Which path a person takes often depends on how severe their depression is. Usually when you're at that like suicidal level, that type of thing, that's when medication is very important.
Yeah.
But for just low grade everyday depression.
But I think that's important to know, right? Like there is a line there too where it is dangerous and scary and you need professional help. You need medication. And there is no shame in that.
Yeah, the app in your phone isn't going to cut it if you're thinking about taking your life.
No, or like the stress that comes with being a new mom and the depression and things that can come with that can cause you to harm yourself or others. Also, there is no shame in asking for help. There is no shame in saying this is too much for me.
And actually, that's one of my notes here. Is speaking of postpartum depression, since you brought that up.
It's real.
It is, but that is one specific area where non-drug treatments are recommended, because usually a mother is breastfeeding or something like that, and using antidepressants can potentially be damaging to the developing child's brain.
Well, as well as like I know from having 3 kids, your hormones are so up and down. It would be very hard to get
in that
stuff. I would think.
Well, and that speaks to the research too, because it's unethical to do research on pregnant women because of the potential risk to the children.
Yeah.
That type of stuff. And so there isn't any good data on using prescription drugs on pregnant women anyway. And so lots of those things are based on, regular people going on about their lives, or actually tons of research is just based on university students because they're kind of a captive audience. But with postpartum depression, there's not a lot of drug research on them because it's unethical to do that research, and so it's mostly just anecdotal. But
and I would think too, even if you weren't breastfeeding, like those hormone levels, what is it, like 3 years before they kind of settle back down again? I mean, you're on a crazy
train for a long
forever. Time. Anyway, I think it's real, and I think even low levels of it can be very debilitating. And I think as we have developed as a society, and especially with what COVID did to things, we really lost that community to help moms going through that. And it's sad.
Yeah. Community support was definitely damaged by COVID, and the research that I've seen shows that there was a massive spike in mental health issues, depression and anxiety specifically during and post COVID. And it's still much higher now than it was prior to the pandemic, and it's continuing to rise.
I've kind of thought about this week because I struggle with anxiety, always have, but since restrictions and everything for me have gone off with COVID, my anxiety hasn't gotten better. Because I think, like, for somebody that is anxious already, and then all these things were put into place to keep me safe, and then one day they're just all gone, I find it difficult to process. And I mean, there's lots of other things that I'm anxious about, and there's lots of other stuff playing into it. But those things specifically, I know are triggers for me. Oops, I was holding it upside down.
Yes, you're probably going to be horribly muffled.
I'm really muffled. Those things I know that are triggers for me because I'm anxious naturally anyway, or in my normal state. find it frustrating.
Microphones, they typically have that little mesh on the top of them, right?
I
So when
didn't
you
look at it.
Anyway. Yeah. So yeah, medications, fluoxetine, Prozac is kind of the most common mainline drug right now.
And if you're suspicious of somebody that you love, talk to them.
Yeah.
Hey, you look like you're having a hard time.
Yeah, and
Or, I mean, if you're worried that that's going to be offensive, hey, like, do you want to go out for ice cream? And if there's somebody that usually does and they won't, those are signs to look for. In your kids, and your mom, and your dad, and your neighbor.
Yeah.
And yourself.
Because that is really one of the biggest things that combats depression is a sense of community and connection.
Yeah.
And a sense of purpose is another very, very strong. Having a sense of purpose is a very strong indicator of mental wellness. Anyway, so there we go. Medication, psychotherapy.
You were saying about the drugs and I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
Yeah, just fluoxetine, Prozac is kind of the most common one that's being used currently, I think. I'm not too up on my pharmacology currently, but yeah. So the next question that I thought was very interesting and I was curious to look up was, does depression have any links to diet or environmental pollutants?
Okay, so my hypothesis is yes.
Please expand. Why do you think that?
I know from different places that we've lived and in different environments that I definitely have felt more or less depressed.
You are correct.
Oh, look at that.
There is actually a decent amount of evidence that diet and environmental toxins do play a role in depression. Certain dietary patterns, the SAD diet, for example, actually, standard American diet. So cheeseburgers, high carbs, lots of fat, salt. That is
sugar.
Lots of sugar. That is associated with higher levels of inflammation, and inflammation is associated with higher levels of depression.
Yeah.
It actually kind of goes along the same lines with pollutants, environmental toxins, things like that.
Makes sense.
A lot of the things that are pro-inflammatory to your body also go along with increased depression. One study, for example, found high sugar intake during pregnancy could worsen the effects.
Like postpartum.
Postpartum depression. Heavy metals in foods like fish may contribute to inflammation, which is linked to depressive symptoms. And there's what are those PBDEs? Polybutyldiethylenes or something like that. I don't remember. PBDEs and PCBs. I think those are like the PBDEs are like fire retardants in furniture and things like that, and baby clothes and all that type of stuff. Yeah. They've been linked to higher rates of depression, especially in pregnant women. And air pollution, maybe not a direct causation, but it keeps people inside.
Contributing factors, right?
Yeah, keep you inside, keep you from doing your exercise, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
So diet and environmental conditions definitely can increase depression.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so having a healthy diet, reducing exposure to pollutants, all that type of stuff, diet and exercise. I've said it before, say it again. Diet and exercise, that's your magic bullet for just about everything.
That being said, depression can make that almost impossible.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Right? Like that's the double-edged sword of that, is like, you know what you have to do to fix it, but you literally can't. And you need help. So even if like medication isn't the answer for you, having a good therapist, having a good partner, having a good best friend, having a good somebody else, and that, yeah.
But then speaking from the point of view of the depressed person, having a good therapist, having a good friend, having a good spouse, whatever that case may be, I want to say the onus is kind of on the spouse, the friend, the therapist in that situation, because the depressed person is disabled and has a very difficult time reaching out to that person and saying, I need help right now.
And as the spouse of that rejection when you want to help them and they don't want it, it's also very hard to deal with.
Are you saying something about me?
I can say, I mean, it can be very mentally taxing for me. And as an anxious person, it then makes me more anxious that you must not love me, or things are falling apart, or it spirals really fast for me. And so, like, it's not always the best situation. But I'm not trying to like make you feel bad or anything. I'm just trying to give a clear picture of what can be something.
No, I'm depressed. Maybe we shouldn't talk about this anymore. Just joke. I have no mental issues whatsoever.
No, but I think as with any
In any
dealing with
situation.
any sort of challenge or a mental illness or a physical illness or anything like that, the carer or the one who's supposed to be looking after the other one,
the observer,
takes on a lot of mental load that is also very challenging.
Very stressful.
Yeah. So whether you're someone with depression or you are supporting someone with depression, which is probably covering everyone in the world right now, you either are or you know somebody who is.
Well, you definitely know somebody, because the current depression rates are higher than 24 or 25%.
Yeah.
So that means 1 in 4.
Yeah.
So
you know somebody who is, and you're probably close to somebody who is, and that has an effect on you. And so realize that as well. And if you're a depressed person, that means also 1 in 4 of your friends has it too, right? Like, yeah. And so, yeah, it just is. There's a lot in that.
Exactly. Next question. Has depression increased over the last century? And if so, why?
Yes.
Absolutely, yes.
And of all the things that we've talked about, diet, environment changes, family, societal structure, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And I mean,
socioeconomic. I mean, how much harder is it, even from when we were kids to like now, to have what our parents have is impossible.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's for educated people,
the purchasing,
right? Like,
the economics of the purchasing power of the dollar is just so much less now. But even just speaking to the increase in numbers, just since 2019 to now, the rates of depression were like they were on the rise, but it went from like 11-12% to, in some areas, to 25-26% in some areas. And so there was a massive jump over the last 5 years. But yeah, there's been a steady increase in the rates of depression, and some of that has to do with like diagnostic criteria for sure, but also other aspects. And some of it, in my opinion, I don't know if this is right or not, but my gut tells me that some of it has to do with the increased time that we have to think about being depressed.
Yes, that idle hands thing, right?
Yeah, because I mean, you think about it, wasn't that long ago where your main concern wasn't do I feel sad or feel happy? Your main concern was, am I going to eat tomorrow?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's coming back for people. So.
Well, yeah, and that could be why. I mean, that could be why depression is increasing too. But
no, but it's right, and there hasn't been enough time for people to process that and change patterns of behavior and all that. And you're right, and when you have all that free time, quote unquote, rumination is real.
Yeah, the rumination of problems, and again, going back to social media, seeing the perfection that everybody else experiences, and that self-comparison also plays into that for currently. But that being said, the rates of depression have been going up for a long time, even pre-social media.
I think I know from what I'm reading about too, it's also one of the highest comorbidities for things like autism or ADHD that go undiagnosed until adulthood, or right. And so, and even for people who are diagnosed, it is still a common comorbidity. But if you're undiagnosed, it is, and because you're struggling. And we know that those rates are on the rise, and there's all kinds of theories about why those rates are on the rise as well.
Yeah. So speaking of theories about why they're on the rise, there's a couple things that I have I've thought about numerous times as to why these issues are on the rise, and one of them is food insecurity. And so I did a little bit of researching about food insecurity and depression. And so there's a connection between feeling food insecure and struggling with depression. Basically, the not having a reliable access to enough food for healthy active life is definitely linked with mental health issues like depression and anxiety. That was, again, really highlighted during the COVID pandemic. So this relationship is really strong in, again, mothers and young kids. And just to show the numbers, one study, 67% of food insecure mothers reported feeling depressed compared to just 33%. So half of food secure mothers felt depressed.
Yeah, that's depressing.
There's vulnerable groups are where that is really high.
Yeah, as generally is the case with things like that.
Yeah, and again, food insecurity is kind of like this toxic stress cycle, because you feel stressed because you're hungry, and then you're eating cheap food,
yep.
which then has poor nutrient balance, which contributes to inflammation, which contributes to depression, which contributes to a disability or a restriction in your ability to make good choices, or I mean, it's not good choices, but productive choices towards feeling better.
Yeah.
Which then, it becomes a downwards spiral.
Well, that makes sense.
But that food insecurity kind of makes a ripple effect through the whole family from the parents. But my thought, one of the things that we've discussed in the past is the ability to prepare food from scratch.
Yeah.
Right. Going to a grocery store and being able to pick up an onion and know how to peel the onion and cut it into make a soup or whatever. Right.
Yeah.
Versus the people who become dependent on takeout or restaurants or skip the dishes or whatever your case may be, but then don't know how to prepare food for themselves. I would be curious. I haven't been able to find any research on this, but I would be curious to know how that mental burden affects you. That background thought of, I don't know how to feed myself if I can't, if I lose my job or if I can't afford to buy a meal or whatever. How am I going to eat? Because I don't know how to go to the grocery store and I don't know how to cook for myself.
And right now, that reality is very real.
Yeah, well, I mean, we had that conversation with the LG customer service people because they told us that we were overusing our stove.
Yeah, because I used it every day, multiple times a day.
Yeah. Well, that's not
commercial use.
That's commercial use, not residential use.
2 to 3 times a week.
Yeah, and for warming of frozen pizza.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious if food insecurity is obviously affects people's mental health, but is there a more subtle background, fear for people because I don't know how to prepare food, or
I would think there is a definitely an aspect of that. I think there's also a fear, because I think a lot of people in society today, and especially those in our neurodivergent group, there is fear. And I know that I feel this with my restrictions on what I can eat and stuff right now is that availability. What happens when those things that I can have are gone? If I can't get mangoes, we can't grow mangoes here, right? Yeah. What happens if I can't get those things? And it's scary. What happens if I can't get those textures of foods that are safe foods that I can eat?
Yeah.
Right. There's lots that plays into that.
Yeah. And that's one aspect of it. But the kind of the broader aspect in my thoughts were like, people in New York or Calgary or Edmonton or Toronto or whatever, right? These people in these big cities,
living in like food deserts.
yeah,
Kind of thinking of those, yeah.
yeah, you live in a food desert,
Yeah.
and so there's got to be a background worry about what if, the
And
ship
I
runs
think,
into the bridge and suddenly there's no trucks coming into the city.
and that's where I think like a generation before us, that wasn't a concern because things were new. There wasn't things breaking. There weren't bridges collapsing. There wasn't, they didn't live through pandemics at that point.
Yeah.
That generation didn't, and now we are, and we do, and we've experienced what happens when people get scared about toilet paper. I mean, good grief.
Yeah. Well, and
Right?
that's where
And
for me with the food thing, it's like I know if we can't go to the grocery store, I can grab a rifle and I can walk outside and go shoot something, and my family's not going to starve. But
I mean, we also
there's
have food storage, and not that we're like preppers or anything, but we live in a remote northern area of Canada where food can get cut off. And even as a kid, like I didn't grow up here, but I grew up more remotely, and there was times when snow would cut off grocery trucks and deliveries and stuff, and so everybody had food storage because you had to.
yeah,
And so for us, that's a normal thing,
normal way of living, and
right?
so that's where
But when you have those tiny apartments in New York, you have no space for it, and even if you had food, you couldn't cook it.
yeah.
You'd have no way of, and that scares me. Maybe I'm more obviously I'm more paranoid about it than the people who live there because I couldn't handle it.
But that's where I'm curious, and maybe some of the listeners, like I know we have a few listeners who are actually in New York. Is that something that ever crosses your mind? Like is that a concern? Or is it something that because it's my concern, I've prepared myself for it, and it's not anybody else's concern? I'm the only person who's paranoid about it, and so anyway, so that was the food security thing. The
Well, and I
other,
think tied to food security too, just on my little tangent, is the additives and things in foods that are causing problems as well.
yeah,
Right?
and that's the double-edged sword of access to information too. You get those horrible 70s and 60s. Make this mayonnaise and jello.
Oh, the
Mayonnaise
Jello
and
mold
jello
things.
mold.
That's disturbing, but yes,
Yeah,
continue.
that just turn out, like
No, I don't want to talk about it
nobody
anymore
had
because they
any
make me
idea.
physically sick to think about.
Yeah, they're nasty. But people didn't know that the bright food coloring is potentially bad for you, right?
But people
Or
do
the other,
now, like we do now, and it is still.
and it's still there, and so that's another. Is there a background like
I tell
cigarettes,
you,
right?
as a teacher, I can tell you there is a difference in what kids eat.
You can tell when they have had red jello or whatever.
Yeah, you can. You can tell. Like I've taught kids who come from a split home, right? And I could tell you without knowing which kid or which parent the kid was with by how they acted because because of what they'd eaten.
Yeah. Well, and that goes back to the food, the rates of depression and the rates of mental health issues in disadvantaged populations, lower socioeconomic. There's that dietary have to eat cheap food because you can only afford cheap food.
Yeah,
That's another one of those factors that contributes, and so you get this. It's not just the they have no money. It's all of the
it's
other
not even
effects that build
available.
up.
And we noticed that driving across places, across the countries,
Yeah,
across Canada and the US.
yeah. When we stopped in places where
We
the
assumed.
grocery store was the Dollar General, and
Yeah, that was.
there's no fresh vegetables. You live
Yeah,
in the middle of the corn belt, and you can't buy fresh vegetables.
yeah.
Anyway, so my other personal soapbox of depression is self-doubt, insecurity, or self-efficacy. Do you know what self-efficacy is?
I do, but why don't you explain it for the listeners? Because I don't want to.
Because you don't actually know what self-efficacy
No,
is.
I do know what it is, but I don't know how to explain it.
Okay. So self-efficacy is your self-confidence in yourself, in your ability to do something, a
Yeah.
task or achieve a goal,
Right.
or whatever, right? And so uh there is a tie between depression and feeling insecure about your ability to create, provide, or manage life's challenges. This relationship often revolves around how we see our own abilities, whether we believe we can succeed or feel like we're going to fall short. So this is where self-efficacy, or our confidence in being able to handle tasks. Research shows that when people doubt their abilities, especially when dealing with long-term challenges like health conditions, depression can creep in. For example, people with type 2 diabetes feel that they aren't doing well enough to manage their health, which can fuel feelings of inadequacy and depression.
I've
And
read studies
then,
about migraine sufferers feeling the
yeah,
same way.
same, especially when it's a health condition that kind of out of your control, like migraines, for
It's
example.
as someone who suffers from them, yes.
Another insecurity, self-doubt, self-efficacy thing is self-silencing. So when
Uh-huh.
people hold back their thoughts and feelings to avoid conflict or disapproval, these people struggle with expressing their needs and can feel insecure in their relationships, which can, again, deepen depression.
Makes sense.
And then, again, you get that double-edged sword, or no, I guess not double-edged sword, negative spiraling cycle of depression, because depression can then further skew your self-perception, making you feel even less
Worse.
capable
Yeah.
and less competent.
Yeah.
And then, it's just,
It's a cycle.
again, the downward spiral. But this is, again, going back to the population at large, and this is one of my theories about why, one of the many factors that play into the increasing levels of depression is the fact that people who, 100 years ago, you could take your average person, or, well, I guess maybe you couldn't take your average person, but 100 years ago, 200 years ago, when people were pushing their wagons across the prairies.
You're looking at 200 now. Continue.
Yeah, 100 years ago. 100 years ago, there was people pushing wagons across the prairies into Canada and stuff. Kind of the tail end of it, but most of them were riding trains at that point. But anyway, there's just people from all walks of life would just go off into the prairies and start a homestead and starve to death or survive.
Yeah.
Right. And so they had a broader knowledge base and skill base.
Yeah.
But I guess there's also less things to know how to deal with too.
Yeah.
But as we go forward, there's a loss in self-efficacy with people who don't know how to maintain the complexities of their life.
Well, I think that ties into what I was talking about earlier. Is I don't even think some of those people, I think it's great, and some of the people who are not getting help and stuff afterwards because they really don't know how to navigate that. And even if you're like, well, I gave them the tools, I told them the number to call. That's all fine and dandy. What if you don't know how do you talk to somebody?
Yeah.
What are you going to say when they pick up the phone? One of my things, you probably don't even know this. One of the things that I hate when they call is when I have to call and book an appointment, they're like, oh, what time works for you? I hate that question. Like, with a passion. I hate that question.
Yeah, just give me a time and I'll make it work.
Right? Can you say, like, oh, we have some time available on these days?
Yeah.
Right? Like, it just is very triggering to me. I just get irritated, like, from that point, and I just feel like, I don't know. You're asking me things I don't know already. This is a bad idea. I'm just going to end this call and not book this appointment.
That's perfectly normal anxiety. Yeah.
But I think, like, as a depressed person, you're expecting a lot from them.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And if you're on your own, especially.
Yeah. Kind of my background, what I was thinking of is not so much like how do you navigate social situations, but we're getting to the point now where people don't know how to change a light bulb.
Yeah.
right? You got to call the building manager to change your light bulb, or vehicles. Vehicles are so bloody complex now. Used to be like the Ford Model T, right? It came with a toolkit.
Yes, I know. You've obsessed over this multiple times.
Well, but it's an example of this, right? Came with a toolkit and instructions of how to change things, and now you get your Ford owner's manual, and it tells you not to drink the battery acid, right? And so,
But is that not also a statement on the height of depression that people are thinking, maybe this will make me feel better, or maybe this will end it for me, right? Like, you've got to kind of wonder, what kind of weirdo does the Tide Pod challenge? There is an aspect of that they're obviously already suffering to some degree.
yeah, and so that's where, like, maker community stuff. Kind of wrapping up here. I know for myself, when, like, we just finished the subfloor in the house.
Yay!
And the day after finishing the subfloor, I was on high of, yay, we did something, I created, it was great. And then
I did not notice this at all.
that I was on a high.
Or the crash the next day after that.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally didn't notice.
Because then there's the next step, right?
And dark pit of despair.
And careful, don't reveal too many secrets.
No, but it's true, because you're like, yes, I did it. And you're great, and then you realize, crap, I have to do this again, and the next time it's gonna be harder, almost, right?
Yeah,
like the next step is building on that. The next activity is building on that, and so it's going to require more of me, or it's going to require that level again, and you know what it took to get there.
Yeah, and I mean, we're at the point now where I've everything from this point going forward, I've done multiple times.
Except for
times over. Except for the putting up the SIPs. It's the first time I've ever done that, and so there is that paranoia, and I think that's what's kind of got me down right at the moment, is just this new construction method that I've never done before. Like I know the.
And perhaps if we weren't also dealing with parenting that we've never done before either.
Yeah.
We'd be okay.
Yeah, if I was only dealing with one challenge. But I know the theory behind this, and there's nothing that I think will be surprising. Like, I think it'll be easy to do.
Yeah, but it's not like if I wake up tomorrow and I'm like, Andrew, get up and do this thing. That's not going to motivate you to do it either.
Definitely offer some motivations.
I will clap for you while you put up the wall.
There we go. That'll make me feel good. Yeah, I do have the crane coming soon, though.
Yes.
So that'll be fun. I'll make some videos of the crane. Anyway, sidetrack. But I think that's another factor in my mind, is just the increasing complexity of the world and the decreasing ability of people to feel self-efficacy in their life.
Yeah.
I think is probably a major contributing factor to the increase in rates of depression. But that's where, as a maker community, I think you hear a lot of people that will say, my creative outlet is my therapy, right? Because I think you get that sense of accomplishment, and which improves your sense of self-efficacy, which gives you that little bit of boost to your mood, and so on and so forth, which is the reversing the negative cycle.
A point that I just thought about that I'm thinking in all of this is my wrap-up point is, I also think that we downplay or don't understand how many people in previous generations self-medicated with alcohol and things like cocaine that were normal for people to use. And I don't think that we factor that into an understanding of that, because we know there's a genetic component and all of that kind of thing that ties into it as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you look at it from that lens as well, this has been a problem for a really long time. Yeah, maybe you didn't notice it in your ancestors who died at 40 working in a mine. But we're not. We're living and circumstances and things like that are different. But if you look historically at the rich, the wealthy, who weren't having to struggle for survival like you talked about, they were definitely abusing drugs and things to get by.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's like
And
the East
today,
India Company. Right?
yeah, well, and like in today's society, like, oh, it's on the rise, all of this. Well, I don't even think we've tipped the iceberg. And I don't think it's because solely of environmental factors. I think it's also because this is some degree of depression is part of living and having to deal with that and move forward, because things don't go perfectly and your mood is going to go down and your brain chemicals are going to fluctuate and all that stuff's going. But I think a lot of it we don't even know or realize because people are self-medicating.
Yeah, good point.
Hug somebody today. That's good. It's good for you.
Are you just gonna randomly hug a stranger?
No, that would give me anxiety. That's
No.
why. That's why I have children, so I can hug people I know.
Smile. How about we just say smile at somebody today?
Yeah, smile. Say hello.
Yeah.
Talk to the person in line ahead of you. I do that occasionally.
Me too. You're very brave.
Yeah. Well, say I go to self-check, so I don't have to do that. Or talk to the cashier. Speaking of things that probably contribute to depression and isolation.
So find a community that you
Yeah.
that you find support in, which is a perfect opportunity to roll into a Patreon thank you read.
Are you going to do the weird read?
I'm kind of committed to doing weird reads.
Oh, no.
You didn't listen to the last one. The last one
Yeah,
was...
but they make me uncomfortable.
Do you want to do it?
No!
The last one, I used an AI voice to generate a Trump. It was a Donald Trump one.
I have no words for you.
In honor of the recent election. There.
I have no words at all.
People are enjoying it.
Okay. It's fine. It's one of those things that I'm like, it's like the tense part in a movie that I avoid like plague.
Because it gives you anxiety.
Because it gives me anxiety and I don't like it.
So yeah, let's go on to that Patreon read.
You go for it. I'm going to play a matching game and pretend it's normal.
So here we go. Channeling my inner Eeyore in honor of a depression episode. Well, I suppose it's time to thank a few folks. Not that they need it, of course, but I guess it's the right thing to do. First, there's Matthew from Argiano Serio. You've got skill, I guess. It's not like anyone's asking for it. But you're out there doing good work anyway. So, thanks, Matthew. I think. Brad of Brad's Customs. Well, you've certainly put in your time, haven't you? Custom work. Probably better than most, I'd imagine. Really, I guess. That's pretty helpful. So, thanks for that, Brad. Keith of Blackthorn Concepts. He's got talent, drive, dedication. If anyone can make a name for themselves, I suppose it's you. It's not like it's easy, right? Yeah. Thanks, Keith. And there's Eric of Overall Makerworks. You make things happen. At least that's what I hear. Hard work, plenty of sweat, all that. Well, good for you, Eric. Thanks for still being here. Brandon of Tectonic Creations. Well, someone's got to keep things stable. Might as well be you. Some people are like that, I guess. Thanks for being steady and reliable. And the Grant Alexander. I'm sure you hear that a lot, huh? Made a name for yourself. Must be nice. Anyway, thanks, Grant, for being you, I guess. And of course, this week, got a special shout out from Miguel Angel Viela. Miguel, you've been putting in the work. People like you. Well, I think they do. I guess you deserve to be recognized. Thanks, Miguel. If you want to be a part of all this, whatever this is, head over to our Patreon. Maybe you'll find something worth your time. Could always use more people around here. Thanks for listening.